Imagine you're in a really high-stakes meeting. You have this perfect idea.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
You open your mouth, you start your sentence, and like halfway through, you realize you are completely trapped in a maze of your own words.
Just watching the client's eyes glaze over, it's brutal.
It really is an agonizing feeling. You start backtracking, piling on more clauses,
Un-
just hoping to eventually stumble onto a coherent point.
right, and in that moment of panic, we usually misdiagnose the problem. We think it's a failure of intelligence, or like we just forgot the right vocabulary.
But you know the words.
Exactly. You know the words. What actually collapsed was your mental architecture. It's fundamentally an engineering problem. You basically tried to build a roof before pouring the foundation.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. We are looking at a really comprehensive guide called English That Connects. It's a practical guide to clear speaking, presenting, discussing, and writing.
And the core philosophy of this material, it really requires a complete paradigm shift regarding how we perceive fluency.
Right, because fluency isn't what we usually think it is.
No, it's not. It is not the ability to fill every single microsecond with, complex, impressive vocabulary. Fluency is simply the ability to sequence an idea in an order that allows another human brain to successfully receive and parse it.
I love that. Language is a structural bridge, not an intelligence test. Okay, let's unpack this.
Huh.
Because if fluency is about sequencing, where does that process actually begin?
Well, according to the guide, real communication starts long before you select a single word.
Right, it starts with like calibrating the environment.
Exactly. You have to map the territory before you build the bridge. The source suggests that before you open your mouth or, start typing, you have to answer 3 structural questions.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, who is the audience?
Hmm.
Second, what must this message accomplish? And third, where or how will this interaction happen?
So the context basically dictates the bandwidth and the required formality of the language.
Precisely. The text gives a highly practical example of this calibration. Think about if you need to cancel on a friend.
You probably just send a text saying, sorry, I can't make it tomorrow.
Right. But what if you are emailing a professor or a manager you don't know very well?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'd write something like, I won't be able to attend tomorrow's meeting because I have a medical appointment.
Exactly. Both of those convey the exact same data point. You aren't going. But the second version respects the structural distance of the relationship.
It provides a rationale.
Yeah, and providing that rationale fills a vacuum that might otherwise be filled by the recipient's assumption.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Oh,
So
yeah.
once you establish that environmental context, you need a formula to actually construct the thought itself, right?
Right. And the guide breaks this down into an incredibly reliable architecture. It's 3 parts: center, support, and landing.
Center, support, landing. Okay.
The center is your core directive. It's the one thing that matters most. Then the support provides the load-bearing pillar, like a reason or a specific fact.
And the landing.
The landing is the actionable conclusion, or the next step.
The book uses that example about proposing to open a school library during lunch, right?
Yeah, that's a perfect illustration of it.
So the center would be, I think the library should be open during lunch.
Right. Clear and direct.
Then the support is, some students need a quiet place to study, and the landing is, could we try opening it twice a week?
See how clean that is? It's a 3-step progression. There is literally nowhere for the listener to get lost.
To guarantee they don't get lost, the guide talks about establishing the sentence skeleton early on.
Yes, the skeleton is crucial. You have to identify your subject and your main verb right out of the gate.
Before any of the background context.
Before the background context, before you add qualifiers, yes, give the listener the skeleton. For example, the project connects people. That right there is your baseline infrastructure.
It's kind of like, think of your sentence like an API request to someone else's brain.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, if you don't send the mandatory parameters first, like the subject and the verb, the other person's brain just returns an error code.
Right, they just can't process the request.
Exactly. All the flowery adjectives, the dependent clauses, all that background lore, that is just optional metadata.
And if you try to send the metadata before the core command,
The listener's cognitive buffer overflows, and they just stop listening.
that is a phenomenal way to visualize it. Because when you lead with those mandatory parameters, you secure the listener's working memory.
And once that API connection is stable, you can safely pass along the metadata.
Exactly. Then you can specify the participants, like older residents and high school students. You can add the timeline that began last month.
And from a psychological standpoint, Establishing that firm skeleton gives you, the speaker, a safe anchor point to return to if you lose your train of thought mid-delivery.
Which happens to all of us.
Yeah.
So we have this solid, highly functional sentence skeleton. But how do we ensure it actually maps to reality without overpromising or, triggering skepticism?
Right, because the guide gets deeply analytical here about how we leverage time and logic to manage perception.
What's fascinating here is that it treats grammar not as a set of arbitrary academic rules, but as strategic dials. You use them to calibrate the structural integrity of your argument.
Like verb tense.
Yeah, consider verb tense. Tense isn't merely a timeline pointing to the past, present, or future. It actually dictates the address and the fundamental shape of an event.
Wait, what do you mean by the shape of an event?
Well, saying I walk to school frames the event as a routine. It's a stable, immutable fact. But saying I am walking to school shapes it as a temporary action that's currently in progress.
Oh, I see. So you are signaling to the audience exactly how to interpret the permanence of the situation.
Exactly. And we use those dials for the strength of our claims, too. The guide discusses how we leverage modal verbs.
Words like must, should, may, and might.
Right. These aren't just vocabulary words. They are risk management tools. The source uses a highly relevant example. Schools must ban all smartphones.
That feels like a very aggressive statement.
Because it is. When you use an absolute modal like must, you are making a massive, brittle claim. And let's look at the psychology of why that's dangerous.
It puts people on the defensive, right?
Instantly. When you say must ban, you trigger the audience's defense mechanisms. Their brain stops listening to your reasoning and immediately begins hunting for exceptions just to prove your absolute claim wrong.
You've essentially turned the audience into an adversary.
Yes. But if you shift the modal dial and say, schools should set clear rules for smartphone use during lessons, you completely bypass those defensive filters.
Because you've narrowed the scope.
Exactly.
The guide calls this evidence-sized wording, which I think is a great term. Limiting a claim doesn't mean your argument is weak. It just means you're being mathematically precise about where your evidence safely stands.
It's the exact same logic for framing data.
Yeah.
You don't say everyone prefers digital notes because a single person who prefers paper destroys your credibility.
Right, you say, in our survey, 18 of 30 students preferred digital notes.
It creates an airtight perimeter around your data. It protects your credibility while keeping the audience in a receptive, non-combative state.
Okay, let me challenge something the guide brings up in this section, though.
Sure, what is it?
It talks heavily about politeness. Now, in a fast-paced corporate environment or like a crowded Slack channel, adding layers of could you please and I would appreciate it if, doesn't that just feel like a highly inefficient fluff?
I hear that a lot.
Isn't it better to just be direct? Give it to me straight and save us both some keystrokes.
If politeness were merely about inserting pleasantries, you would be entirely correct. It would be inefficient. But the source argues a fundamentally different definition.
Which is?
Politeness is clarity. True, polite language reduces ambiguity. It means clearly defining the task, the deadline, the rationale, and the expected effort.
Okay, so a command like send me the Q3 file, while brief, is actually inefficient because it creates a vacuum of context.
Exactly. It forces the recipient to guess the urgency, the format, the purpose. A truly polite and therefore highly efficient request sounds more like this. Could you review the first 2 slides of the Q3 file by Thursday? Your feedback will help us finalize the introduction.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you've given them a specific role, a strict time frame, and a clear reason.
You are respecting their time and their cognitive load by completely removing the guesswork.
That reframes it entirely. Politeness is just high-resolution communication.
Exactly.
So we've mastered the mechanics of a solo sentence, we've established the API connection, we've calibrated our claims to bypass defensive filters, and we've removed ambiguity.
But a conversation isn't a monologue.
Right. How do we hand that sentence over to another human being in real time?
The text breaks conversational interaction down into a highly functional 3-beat rhythm: receive, add, return.
Receive, add, return.
A conversation is a continuous feedback loop. If someone asks you a question and you just deliver a static answer, you are breaking the loop.
It's a total system crash. Like, if a colleague asks, how was the conference? And you just say, it was informative. The interaction dies right there on the spot.
Yeah, you process their input, but you didn't output any parameters for them to work with.
To keep the system running, you utilize that rhythm. You receive the input, you add a relevant data point, and you return the focus to them.
So instead you'd say, the conference was informative, especially the keynote on supply chains. Have you ever heard that speaker?
You're actively giving the other person a structural hook to attach their next thought to. It's like a game of catch. You can't just hold the ball, you have to throw it back.
That's a perfect analogy.
But what happens when you drop the ball? Like, what if your internal server just lags?
What do you mean?
Like, you're in the middle of that rhythm and you just completely blank on a crucial vocabulary word. Because in a second language, or honestly, even when you're just exhausted in your native language, that buffer can empty out instantly.
Oh, sure. And the panic in that moment usually comes from viewing vocabulary as a pass or fail test. But the guide offers a brilliant tactical workaround.
Which is to describe the function or the appearance.
Yes. If your brain drops the phrase tool library, you don't freeze and abort the sentence. You pivot. You say, I can't recall the exact term, but it functions like a library, except for borrowing construction equipment.
Right. Paraphrasing isn't a sign of a weak vocabulary. It's a core survival skill in real-time communication.
It proves you understand the underlying concept well enough to describe its mechanics.
But let's look at a more volatile scenario. What about when the system crashes, not because of a missing word, but because of a total ideological disagreement?
Disagreement. That is where structural communication usually breaks down into total chaos.
Right. Voices get raised, people stop listening.
But the text outlines a precise three-move tactical response to handle it without severing the connection. You receive the point, identify the difference, and provide a reasoned alternative.
So you never just say you're wrong.
Never. Because that attacks the person's logic directly and triggers those defensive filters we talked about earlier.
Instead, you say something like, I understand your concern about the upfront cost, but my calculation prioritizes the long-term maintenance savings.
Exactly. You are assigning contrasting positions to discover variables that one side might have missed.
The guide makes a profound point here, which is that debate is not about achieving dominance.
No, it's a tool for bringing asymmetric information together to construct a more accurate model of reality.
I want to touch on the pacing of all this, though. In the high-stakes debate or a fast-paced meeting, the pressure to instantly return the interaction is immense.
Really is.
Is there ever a scenario where you can just pause the feedback loop? Is it okay to just stop talking?
Yes, absolutely. The guide explicitly gives permission to use silence as active processing time. You can say, let me consider that for a moment, or that introduces a new variable. I need a second to organize my thoughts.
That's so validating.
We often equate fluency with a relentless, uninterrupted stream of words. But true fluency includes the ability to intentionally pause, compute, and return without abandoning the interaction.
That removes so much artificial pressure. Okay, now let's look at what happens when the architecture shifts completely.
You mean scaling it up?
Yeah, the receive-add-return rhythm works perfectly when you have a willing partner providing feedback. But what happens when you remove the feedback loop entirely? When you aren't talking to one person, but broadcasting to a room of 50 people who can't talk back?
Right. Speeches, presentations, slides.
It changes the physics of the communication.
It fundamentally alters the cognitive load on the audience. The most critical distinction that Guys makes is that a speech is not simply an essay read aloud.
Because when someone reads an essay, they control the pace. If their attention drifts, their eyes can physically jump back 3 lines to recover the context.
But auditory processing is strictly linear and ephemeral. Listeners only receive spoken language once, in real time. If they miss the subject and verb, the packet is dropped forever.
Which is why you must engineer the script differently.
You have to write in literal units of breath. Sentences must be short enough to fit comfortably within the audience's short-term working memory.
And because they can't see paragraph breaks, you have to use spoken signposts.
Yes, you must verbally announce the architecture. First, let's examine the problem. Next, we will look at the data.
You essentially have to act as their navigation system. And this structural discipline absolutely applies to presentation slides as well.
Oh, the guide is ruthless about this. Slides are not a teleprompter.
No.
The visual should reveal the structural relationship between ideas, not just project a dense wall of text. The golden rule is one slide, one full sentence message.
So a vague noun phrase like survey results at the top of a slide, that's a bad idea.
It's terrible because it forces the audience to read the entire chart to figure out what you want them to know. And by the time they figure it out, they haven't heard a word you've said.
Instead, the slide should lead with the conclusion like, later library hours receive the most support.
Exactly. You reduce the cognitive friction so they can focus their bandwidth on your voice.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When we talk about generating content in presentations today, we cannot ignore generative AI.
We really can.
And the guide addresses this directly. It advises treating AI as a draft partner, not an authority. My absolute favorite tactic in the text is using AI to stress test your own logic.
How so?
You write your proposal, you feed it into the AI, and you prompt it to generate 5 serious, rigorous objections to your idea.
That is brilliant. You are utilizing the machine's processing power to find the structural weaknesses in your argument before you ever expose it to a human audience.
It's such a great use of the technology.
It is, but this raises an important question and honestly a stern warning about the digital era's impact on our communication standards. The guide establishes a hard rule. Do not use English. You cannot explain yourself.
Yeah, that's the danger of outsourcing your logic. A language model can generate a beautifully structured, highly persuasive paragraph in like 3 seconds.
But if it hallucinates a connection or uses a modal verb that overstates the evidence and you just copy-paste it, you own that failure.
The sender always retains total liability for what those words do in the physical world.
Because the AI is not standing in the room when the client asks for clarification on a complex clause. If you didn't build the architecture, you won't know how to defend it when it's challenged.
You have to verify the data, calibrate the tone, and ensure the logic actually holds weight.
Which perfectly sets up the ultimate case study from the guide.
Yes. To prove that these concepts aren't just academic theory, the text walks through this escalating real-world scenario featuring a student named Sarah Mizuki.
It demonstrates exactly what happens when the pressure is on and the technology completely fails.
So Sarah is tasked with proposing a multilingual emergency communication project, right?
Yeah, her neighborhood had experienced severe flooding, and a non-Japanese speaking neighbor named Maria had come to her in a panic, entirely unable to parse the translated emergency alerts.
That's terrifying.
So Sarah decides to design a simplified, physical route card to guide non-native speakers to safety.
The stakes are incredibly high. She secures a chance to pitch this project to city officials for funding, but her initial draft of the presentation is just a total disaster.
Oh, it was bad. She wrote this dense, heavily academic script trying to sound as impressive as possible.
Right, and she practices in front of her friend Yui, and Yui gives her the hard truth. She basically says, I was lost before you even reach the main topic.
Sarah fell into the classic trap. She prioritized her own vocabulary display over the audience's ability to receive the data.
But she listens to the feedback. Taking Yui's advice, Sarah completely tears down the architecture and rebuilds it from the ground up.
She abandons the essay format entirely.
And she distills her entire presentation onto just 4 core index cards: problem, evidence, proposal, and test.
Skeleton detail, polish. She stripped the entire pitch back to its bare, load-bearing foundation.
And it is a profound thing she did, because during the actual presentation in front of the city officials, her worst nightmare comes true.
A total tech failure.
The screen goes completely black, no slides, no visual aids, nothing.
In a traditional scenario where a speaker relies on their slides as a crutch, that is a fatal error.
Game over.
But Sarah knew her center. Because her mental architecture was mapped out on those 4 foundational cards, her cognitive buffer wasn't overloaded.
She simply acknowledged the failure. She said, we seem to have lost the display. I will describe the card. And she just held up the physical prototype, walking the officials through the route step by step.
She maintained incredible composure.
But surviving the blackout wasn't even the end of it. The real test comes during the Q&A.
Right, a skeptical city official leans in and points out a major vulnerability in her data.
He notes that she only interviewed 12 people to develop this prototype, and he asks why the city should allocate funding based on such a statistically insignificant sample size.
This is the moment where evidence-sized wording saves the project. A less disciplined speaker would have gotten defensive or, tried to overpromise what those 12 interviews meant.
But Sarah does neither. She openly concedes the limitation.
She admits that 12 people do not mathematically represent the entire community, and it does not definitively prove her card is the ultimate solution.
She shrinks the claim to bypass his defensive filters. I love it. She tells the committee, our goal is not to protect our first idea. Our goal is to make the information easier to use.
And she argues that while the data doesn't justify a citywide rollout, it provides more than enough evidence to justify funding a small, localized test.
If we synthesize this case study with the broader themes of the guide, Sarah's success in securing that funding had absolutely nothing to do with flawless grammar or an impenetrable slide deck.
Not at all. She succeeded because she relentlessly prioritized the audience's reception. By refusing to claim absolute certainty, she left structural room for others to participate in the process.
And that participation is what ultimately made the project successful.
Exactly. Because she left room for feedback, real users, like her neighbor Maria, can point out flaws, like a specific corner on the route card being too dark and needing a better photo.
Sarah didn't let her ego or her language get in the way of the actual connection.
When you step back and look at all the mechanics we've discussed today, from sentence skeletons to evidence-sized wording, a surprisingly profound realization emerges.
What's that?
Accuracy and logic in language are often stereotyped as cold, robotic, or overly academic. But in practice, logical language is deeply empathetic.
Empathic, yeah.
It respects the audience's time and cognitive limits enough to light a clear path for them. It reveals the exact basis of a judgment while leaving space for their unique perspective. Ultimately, structural accuracy in communication is a highly functional form of care.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Whether you are mapping out a high-stakes boardroom presentation, negotiating a project scope, or simply trying to explain to a friend why a certain movie plot makes no sense, the architecture of your thoughts dictates your success.
It really does.
Think about the last email or text message you sent that resulted in a frustrating misunderstanding. Was the API missing a parameter? Was your landing completely absent, leaving the recipient guessing what you actually wanted?
Or did you dial up a modal verb too high, using an absolute word like never or always, forcing the other person to immediately hunt for exceptions?
It is a universal human experience to fall into those structural traps. But the solution is not to retreat, study a dictionary, and wait until you possess the vocabulary of a novelist before you speak up.
The solution is engineering.
The next time you face a complex communication challenge, do not attempt to construct a flawless, impenetrable wall of text. Just establish the connection. Start with one honest, structurally sound sentence. Identify your subject and your verb. Give one highly specific data point as your support.
And most importantly, when you reach the landing, remember to hand the process back over to the other person.
And actually listen to their input, because that feedback loop is where real enduring understanding is built. You don't have to sound perfect. You just have to engineer a path for the other person to meet you halfway. Go build that bridge.